A back to school like no other, right amid a pandemic and strict guidelines to ensure safety of those within the school community. Day 2 of the phased reopening of schools are seeing students still streaming back to school, with parents filled with anxiety and a lot of questions on the safety of their children. On this episode of The Front Row, let's revisit the guidelines over this reopening, the implementation in various institutions and the gaps in the sector exposed by the COVID-19 pandemic. How do we streamline this expansive sector? How do we continue with the curriculum while maintaining safety for the school community? And what solutions are there as we move forward? We seek these answers from a panel of experts joining us on this episode of The Front Row. Good evening, I am Akisa Wandera, and to be part of this conversation, do log on to slido.com. The event code is #TheFrontRow. You can also follow the conversation as you also give us your views on the same on Twitter at Akisa Wandera, at KTN News KE. The hashtag to use is The Front Row. Let's take a look at who we have at this hour. Omboko Milemba is a teacher by profession and is the chairperson of the Kenya Union of Post-Primary Education Teachers. He is the member of Parliament in Muhaya constituency and serves as a member in the Education Committee, House Business Committee, as well as the Committee on Labour and Social Welfare in the 12th Parliament. He previously served as a committee member of the International Labour Conference in Geneva. And we thank you, Honourable Milemba, for joining us for this conversation. Next, we have Helen Inyega, or Professor Helen Inyega, an associate professor and consultant in language literacy, numeracy, early childhood and special education in the Department of Education, Communication and Technology at the University of Nairobi. Professor Helen Inyega evaluates and provides technical support to education projects across Africa, and we're glad to have you here as a policy expert in this particular sector. And finally, we have Mr. Nicholas Mayo, who was elected as chairperson of the Kenya Parents Association in October 2016. Prior to joining National Parents Association, he worked at the Kenya International Convention Center, KICC, where he was a supervisor in the filing department. He later joined politics, and his major interests are assisting the less fortunate and mentoring group leadership. Thank you, Mr. Mayo, for being with us on this episode of The Front Row as we dissect a number of issues in the education sector. And right before we get into the conversation, a lot has been said about the phased reopening. There's a lot of back and forth before this happened throughout this pandemic period. But finally, grade 4, class 8 and Form 4 students are back in school, still streaming into the compound. A lot of guidelines guiding this particular plan that the government has laid out, and I want us to quickly just take a look at what the plan is, some of the guidelines that are expected to guide the reopening or the phased reopening of schools, even as we expect the rest of the school to get to join their fellows. So restricted movement in and out of institutions. This will happen in all institutions, whether private or public. Mandatory temperature checks, which we have been seeing in various public institutions, malls, supermarkets, you name it. We'll be seeing this happen in schools as well. Face masks should be on at all times, not just for the learners, but for the teachers and the school community, non-teaching staff as well. And I should mention that among the guidelines for those who are living with disability, they will be using transparent face masks, not to hinder their ways of communication. 1 meter distance to be observed between desks, and this is when they're in a classroom setting. We understand that a lot of classes will be held outside if the weather favors it. Schools to create isolation facilities. Every school is expected to have an isolation facility, and if not, liaise with their local healthcare provider or local healthcare institution to help with this. Assemblies, parents meeting, co-curriculum activities like drama, music festival, games have been banned until when the risk is very low. And of course, school buses should also maintain social distance with the students in it, half capacity, they say. Students to be served in shifts where possible, take their lunch in class, and pedal-operated taps to be stationed. And of course, this is to support water and sanitation projects to enhance these guidelines and provision of water and soap at all times in this in these institutions. Of course, you'll also be seeing what will happen in boarding schools even as we go on. But before we get into all that, I want us to now get into the conversation with our panelists. I'd like to start with you, Mr. Mboko Milemba, as the chairperson of KUPPET, a member of parliament. Teachers went into school 2 weeks ago, and there's varied reactions to this phased reopening. The government expresses confidence that we are ready to do this. From the KUPPET side, what is the status of the preparation for teachers?
Oh, thank you very much. We as teachers, we are basically ready because we went to school much early. By 28th, the Teacher Service Commission, the employer for teachers, had called the teachers back to school. And for all along, the teachers have been waiting to see if there's some subsiding in the COVID so that the teachers go back to school. So we have been ready and have been on duty. And as a union, we were involved in the COVID Education Committee. Our Secretary General, Akelo Misori, sat on that particular committee. So we've been following everything as it unfolded. And we are fully behind the decision that schools begin again. And we currently support the first opening of schools, of course, beginning with the candidate classes, that's class 8, Form 4, and of course grade 4, because grade 4 will also be transiting. So in terms of preparation of the teachers, going to your question, is that yes, there are gaps, but the teachers are ready to go and work. What are the gaps? The gaps would be that in school, the ministry has not organized everything you said to be in place. And therefore, we shall have challenge of the running water, the face masks, which parents are being asked to buy, and social distancing, because there has been no improved infrastructure. But we are also hoping that given that we have only the candidate classes in schools, we shall be able to use all the classes to cover or teach all the candidates, and that should suffice in terms of social distancing. But more importantly would be then the basic requirements for teachers, more so the principals and the head teachers to begin schools. So this is where the challenge is. That money was sent in school last week on Thursday, but the money that was sent in school was 20% of capitation. Usually, capitation is sent to schools as follows: 50% in first term, 30% in second term, and 20% in third term. Unfortunately, the Ministry of Education sent 20%, which should have been sent in third term, yet we are doing second term. So there's a deficit of 10% that all heads, all principals needs to get in schools for efficient and just begin running schools.
All right.
So that's a gap that is so serious. Thank you.
Okay, we'll get into more of the gaps, and I'm glad you've mentioned the funding question, because we're going to expansively look at this as well. Professor Inyega, and for you, and in previous forums, you've said it's good that we've finally reopened the schools. But given how we are handling the whole situation, are you satisfied as an educationist and as a policy expert in this field?
Thank you very much, Akisa, for the opportunity. I actually agree that we are ready for our children to go back to school. And as an educationist, I actually think the government has put in place measures to ensure that this program becomes successful. The first opening actually becomes successful. From where I sit, I have observed and listened in to what the Ministry of Education has been saying in terms of sending out officers in the schools to monitor and determine readiness of schools to receive the students. And as far as I'm concerned, I think the schools are ready. But as Mr. Milemba has said, it's not 100% foolproof that everything is in place, but we need to start somewhere to ensure that we begin going back to normalcy as we knew it.
Thank you. Let's hear from the parents. And I began by saying there's been a lot of anxiety and a lot of questions from parents over the safety of their children. Mr. Mayo, you represent the Parents Association. What are your thoughts on how we have driven this so far, the phased reopening, grade 4, class 8 and Form 4? As ahead in the Parents Association. Are you happy with how we've handled this so far as a country?
Actually, Wandera, as Parent Association, we had presented our presentation to the National COVID Education Committee that schools should be reopened only when the curve has flattened. Secondly, we said we would open school when all the preventive measures have been put in place. As we speak now, we are confident as parents that the behavior of the virus has flattened, and measures are being put in place as we speak. So we are agreeing with the government that they should open schools. And as a parent, what concerns us most is the safety of our children, and we want safe reopening. In that the first reopening actually will go a long way in keeping the safety of our learners.
All right, thank you. Mr. Milemba, I'll come back to you from where you left off, saying we have a 10% deficit. The funding issue has been a very big problem so far. And even before I speak to you, I'd like us to take a look at something or what the Cabinet Secretary Education, Professor George Magoha, said pertaining school fees and parents, letting their children go to school. Let's listen to that, then we get back to you.
I have said that as we comply with the government requirements for those few who still have to pay fees, primary school is free, so there's nothing like fees. Day secondary schools are free. But for the boarding schools where boarding charges are charged, may I once again plead with our principals and head teachers to ensure that no child is sent home on account of school fees, both in the private and the public sector. Because people think I keep talking about public. Even the private schools. Finally, for the private schools, where some people have tried to equate reopening with those who had online classes, we want to make it very clear that all children will start from where they left. All children will start from where they left, and like I've said, the gold standard are these two. So even if you make so much noise, if you send a child home because the child did not engage in online classes, that is criminal, and we shall come for you. The fact that it's a private school does not protect you.
All right, two things. The Cabinet Secretary there saying no student should be sent home because of lack of fees. But on the other hand, stakeholders are decrying the lack of enough funding, to drive this. A lot of things have been added on top: infrastructure, sanitation issues. So without funding, without enough funding, I should say, Mr. Milemba, and the CS calling for no student to be sent home because of fees. How do we merge this and ensure that we streamline everything as we go forward in terms of ensuring we keep with the guidelines?
Thank you. I think I would laud and actually appreciate Professor Magoha's statement. As we new to encourage everyone. So if you look at his statement, he is actually encouraging every parent to take the student to school. He is encouraging every
Mr. Milemba, I'll have to cut you short. Mr. Milemba, just let me cut you short. We're having a problem with your sound. Hold on to that thought. I will come back to you shortly. Mr. Mayo, this likely would be a lauded move from the Parents Association. What are your thoughts on that?
Actually, what the CS said is true, because under the Basic Education Act 2013, 55 and 43 it says that education in Kenya is free and compulsory. If a parent takes a child to a day school, he or she will only meet a fee for the food of that child and the uniform. That is a parent's obligation. But if you take your child to a boarding school as your choice, you will also meet the boarding fee. So the tuition fee is actually free because government gives in high school 22,224, and for primary 1,400 for every child. So if our children are sent home by the principals, they will be going against the directive of the CS. So I'm urging all the parents to release the children to go back to school, because actually the problem we've gone through over 7 months is hectic for us as parents. We've lost so many to teenage pregnancy, child labor, drug and substance abuse, name it, so many things. So we prefer, as parent association, our children to be in school because we have regulation in school, we have a bit of discipline in school because of the programs. Unlike at home, where our parents actually move out to look for livelihood, and our children are left at home, and all sorts of things happen. That is why we are losing our teenage girls to teenage pregnancy. So I'm saying that parents should clear school fees, those who have not cleared for second term. And we are happy because our children didn't lose the year. Most of them were very happy. When we told them we are losing the 2020 year and we are going to open January, the children are not happy. But I know most of the parents were happy because they said by November, December we'll be prepared to have school fees for January. But then we are also pushed by our children, because if they are not happy, we are also not happy. Now that the children are more happy than even the parents, I hope we are going to accept their verdict, and the government has opened schools. Let's release our children to go back to school, naming this is now the second term. And those parents who had not paid school fees for second term will pay school fees for second term. Those who had paid the full year will have nothing to pay, because this is still the year 2020. We have not yet done with 2020.
Mr. Mayo, and on that note, we've spoken to a few parents this past few days, and some complain that they have been, slapped by outrageous, school fees plans. Have you heard of any complaints from the association?
Yes.
As an association, rather?
We've received so many complaints from parents, and we are actually compiling them, and we will petition the ministry, because any money added on the fees guideline is called extra levy. And extra levy is prohibited. It's outlawed. So we wouldn't like our parents to suffer because of extra levies. What we are thinking of assisting our children is face mask, because the government the other day, we were with the CS when he gave out some face masks to Olympic primary children. And he said, these children we are giving them because they are destitute. Otherwise, you parents, you will pay for your own. My take is, we also want our children to be safe in school. That is a priority of every concern and priority of every parent. So for that matter, we want quality and reusable masks to be used in school, like what is being used by Olympic primary. And we want our local companies in Kenya to make those reusable masks and avail them in schools so that parents can pay a 50 shilling for one. So we can buy for 2 masks, 100 shillings. That one will assist. Because when I was going around schools, we went with the CS to Nairobi Primary, for example. I saw that most of the children were using disposable masks. And these disposable masks are very expensive for us, because you only use it for one day. The following day you dispose it off. So when I interviewed some parents, they were saying they have bought a packet of having 50 in it to last for 50 days. So that 50 disposable mask is a bit expensive because they bought one at 30 shillings. And that is 1,500 for 50 masks. So we are asking the companies, be it Kikotech, Rivertex, Kikomi, or whichever, which have who can produce reusable masks, which are actually satisfied by caps. Because the biggest problem we have as parents, and everybody else knows this, is the social distancing in school. That is the elephant in the room. So because of this social distancing in school, we want to assist our children by every one of our children wearing reusable and quality masks.
Just so this is not lost in this conversation, are you then asking parents, who've been slapped by, extra charges for their children, are you asking them not to pay?
I'm asking them that if, according to our basic education, we have a fees guideline, and every year we are issued by the ministry a fees guideline, and that is what we are going by. We will not pay any extra money for any reason apart from mask. We will treat the mask as uniform.
That's fair enough.
Any other money we will not pay as parents.
Fair enough. You responded to my question. Thank you.
Extra level.
Okay. Let's hear from Professor Inyega, the funding question. And when we were having a conversation earlier, you raised this issue. And I'd like us to just shift gears to these schools in the outskirts or in informal settlements that are not, abled as some of the schools that we've seen our leaders visit. So what happens to these schools then?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much again for the opportunity. I would like to appreciate the unique role the schools are finding themselves in, and in particular, the head teachers. In fact, I really don't envy their position at this point, because if you're having a deficit of 10% of the capitation that was meant for second term, and your hands are tied basically because you can't send the children home, and while they're in school, you cannot adequately cater for them, I don't know how they do it. I really take my hat off for the principals and head teachers for the kind of work that they do. It's really not easy. That said, the schools are gifted differently in terms of the resources, in terms of the locality of the school. The schools are not the same. And so definitely, the further away you move from the city center, where many of our government officials are visiting, mm-hmm. that is where the rubber meets the road. You find that even the basic infrastructure in terms of the MOH protocols, they are not in place. If you think about the water, you think about even the masks, and the sanitation facilities, they would be lacking in those areas. Mm-hmm. So my concern is for those contexts where the children have to learn anyway because we have asked them to go back to school, but the schools will not be operating at optimal as we expect.
So ideally, how would you expect the government to handle this, the specific schools with such specific cases?
I think it's a real challenge, and I'm not sure that the government alone can be able to do that. I know they have gone out of their way to the best of their ability. If I heard the CS correctly, yesterday he said, for example, that the masks will be given only to the needy students. How they determine who is needy and who is not might be challenging in itself. I just wish there was unique funding, because they have goodwill with development partners, to ensure that they are targeting the support and the help that is being given to the schools, because not all schools would require the same help. I also realize that there are some schools, some low-cost private schools, where they were locked up because of the COVID-19, The teachers were not paid, so the teachers have even moved away from those schools. So even when the schools reopen, they will be understaffed in those schools. What happens to the children, especially when we tell them to social distance? How will the teacher be able to manage more classes now?
Right.
And there are even fewer in the school.
Okay.
So there's quite a lot of many teething issues that we really need to address collectively as Ministry of Education and even as parents coming in.
All right, a good point you raised there. I'd like us at this point to take a quick break. When we get back, we'll be continuing with this conversation. We'd love to hear your thoughts on, this whole conversation around the schools reopening. Are you satisfied with the manner in which the government is handling it? Some of the teething problems that are being observed, how do you think the government and the country at large should handle them? Remember, you can join us on slido.com. The hashtag to use is the front row. Twitter at Akisa Wandera, at KTN News KE. You can as well text us on 22155. I'll be taking a look at a number of your views even as we continue with this all-important conversation. Let's take a quick break. You're watching the front row.